You've probably eaten hundreds of them, maybe even thousands. Salty, crunchy, buttery. Cashews are one of the most addictive snacks on the planet. But what if I told you that each one of those tasty little bites hides a secret most people never hear about? Because behind every cashew is a brutal, dangerous, and surprisingly toxic process. And no, that's not an exaggeration. Unlike peanuts or almonds, cashews don't grow the way you'd expect. They're not just plucked off a tree and thrown into a bag. In fact, the edible part, the cashew nut, is locked inside a shell that contains corrosive, skin-burning oil, the same kind used in insecticides. And someone, somewhere, had to risk their hands to crack it open for you. But that's just the start. From remote farms in West Africa to high-tech factories in Vietnam, the cashew's journey is filled with environmental trade-offs, hidden labor practices, and economic realities that most snack companies won't advertise on the label. So before you grab another handful, buckle up, because we're about to uncover the shocking truth behind the world's most beloved nut, a journey of nature, danger, and human effort that might just change the way you snack forever. Cashews aren't really nuts, and that's just the beginning. Let's start with a fact that surprises almost everyone. Cashews aren't actually nuts. Biologically, they're seeds. They grow outside the bottom of a strange, bright fruit called the cashew apple, a juicy, colorful pod that looks more like a pepper than anything you'd expect from a nut tree. But you don't eat the fruit in most countries. You're after what's hanging just beneath it, the hard, kidney-shaped shell that holds the seed. Cashew trees thrive in hot, tropical regions with sandy, well-drained soil. That's why countries like Ivory Coast, India, Vietnam, Tanzania, and Nigeria dominate global production. These regions offer the perfect climate for these trees to flourish. Hot days, minimal rainfall during harvest, and just enough humidity for growth. Farmers begin the cashew journey by planting carefully selected high-yield seedlings, often grafted to boost disease resistance. These trees take patience, 3 to 5 years to start producing fruit, and even longer to reach full maturity. But once they do, a healthy tree can yield up to 50 pounds of raw cashews per season. Unlike apples or oranges, cashews don't get picked straight from the tree. They're left to fall naturally, which signals they're fully ripe. On small farms, this means daily walks through orchards, bending down to collect nuts by hand. On larger plantations, machines help shake the trees or gather fallen cashews in bulk. And while the cashew apple is often tossed aside in commercial production, it doesn't go to waste everywhere. In parts of Brazil and West Africa, the apple is turned into juice, jam, or even fermented into alcoholic drinks. But globally, the money's in the seed, not the fruit. That small seed you casually pop into your mouth? It's already passed through months, sometimes years, of careful cultivation. But here's where things take a dark turn. Because before that cashew can ever be roasted, salted, or sold, it has to survive a brutal process. One that involves toxic oils, burned hands, and a level of risk most consumers never hear about. Why cashew farmers risk their health to harvest them? At first glance, harvesting cashews might seem simple. Wait for the fruit to fall, pick it up, and move on. But what's rarely shown in commercials or cute snack packaging is that this step can be physically grueling, time-consuming, and sometimes even hazardous. Once the cashew apples fall, harvesters get to work, often under blistering heat. On small farms, this means bending down repeatedly, sifting through the underbrush, and manually collecting each fallen fruit. In some areas, workers use long wooden poles to shake higher branches, trying to bring more apples down without damaging the trees. This might sound old-fashioned, but for millions of cashew farmers, automation isn't an option. Labor is cheaper than machines. In larger commercial operations, mechanized systems do exist, especially in places like Vietnam and India. These machines can collect fallen fruits in bulk, speeding up the process. But even then, much of the sorting and separating is still done by hand. That's because the cashew shell is a problem that machines haven't fully solved. Here's where things get dangerous. The cashew seed is encased in a double shell filled with anacardic acid, a toxic substance chemically similar to what's found in poison ivy. When cracked, this shell releases a caustic oil that can burn the skin, cause blisters, and, with repeated exposure, even lead to permanent nerve damage. It's not just an inconvenience, it's a serious health hazard. Many harvesters wear makeshift gloves, sometimes made from layered plastic bags or old cloth, but these often offer little real protection. In fact, in some regions, workers handle the nuts with bare hands. Why? Because the demand for speed outweighs safety. The faster you move, the more you earn, and in many low-income farming communities, the choice is simple: risk the burn or lose the pay. And it's not just skin exposure. When cashew nuts are eventually steamed to soften the shells, the process releases toxic fumes. In poorly ventilated facilities, workers inhale these fumes for hours at a time. Reports from labor rights groups in India and parts of Africa have described cases of chronic respiratory issues, eye irritation, and even long-term lung damage. What's worse, in some factories, especially those outside regulated supply chains, workers are paid by the nut. That means no hourly wage, no sick leave, and no health care. Just whatever you can earn before the burns force you to stop. Despite the risks, millions of people around the world rely on cashew farming for survival. For some families, it's the only source of income, and while the global cashew market rakes in billions of dollars each year, very little of that wealth ever reaches the people at the start of the supply chain. So the next time you open a bag of cashews, consider this: someone, somewhere, might have literally burned their hands to make that snack possible. But here's the kicker: the real danger doesn't even start until after the nuts leave the farm. Before a cashew ever reaches your kitchen, it has to survive a process that's downright dangerous. And it all starts with what's hiding inside its shell. Unlike other nuts, the cashew's shell is not just tough, it's toxic. Trapped between the outer and inner layers of the shell is a corrosive oil called anacardic acid, a chemical so harsh it can cause severe burns, painful blisters, and even permanent skin damage if handled without protection. The oil is so reactive, it's sometimes used in industrial products like varnishes and brake fluid. And yet, it surrounds the very seed millions of people snack on daily. To make cashews safe for consumption, the nuts first go through steam treatment. In this step, they're blasted with high-pressure steam to soften the outer shell and neutralize the toxic oils. This sounds high-tech, but in many parts of the world, the process is still rudimentary, sometimes involving open fires, makeshift boilers, and poorly ventilated rooms where toxic vapor fills the air. Imagine spending hours a day in that environment, just to earn enough to feed your family. Once steamed, the shell becomes soft enough to crack open. But here's the problem: cashew kernels are fragile. One wrong move, and they break, making them harder to sell as premium whole nuts. That's why many facilities still rely on manual shelling, using small knives or even wooden mallets. Workers must carefully pry open each shell while avoiding the acidic oil inside. And even then, the danger isn't over. The nuts are still coated in a papery skin, sometimes referred to as the testa. To remove this, they're dried again, either in the sun or using ovens, until the skin becomes brittle and flakes off. This step, though less toxic, still adds to the intense labor and time that goes into every single cashew. Despite advancements in automation, machine-based processing is not foolproof. Machines often crack or damage the kernels, reducing their value. So, in many factories, human hands still do the delicate work, exposed to toxins, heat, and long hours. It's a process full of contradictions. Cashews are marketed as clean, healthy, premium snacks, but the truth behind their production is messy, dangerous, and often hidden from public view. And here's the real irony: the more perfect the cashew looks, the more dangerous the work probably was to get it there. But even after the shell is gone and the toxin is neutralized, the fight for quality and profits has only just begun. the hidden human cost of your favorite snack. By the time a cashew is shelled, steamed, and stripped of its toxic layers, it's already passed through a gauntlet of physical danger. But what's even more disturbing than the process is the human cost behind it. Cashew production is a multi-billion-dollar global industry. The nuts are sold as premium health foods in shiny packaging across supermarkets in the US, Europe, and Asia. But most of the people who grow, harvest, and process them, they live in poverty. In countries like India, Vietnam, and several West African nations, many cashew workers are women, often from rural, marginalized communities with few economic options. These women spend long hours performing repetitive, high-risk tasks for wages that, in many cases, are shockingly low. In some regions, the pay is less than $2 a day. Worse, workers are often paid by the piece, not by the hour. That means the more nuts they process, the more money they make, but also the more exposure they get to toxic fumes, scalding steam, and potential injury. There are even cases where workers must pay out of pocket for protective gloves or tools. And if they get sick, there's no safety net, no insurance, no paid time off. And what about regulation? That depends. In some modern, export-focused factories, especially those supplying large Western brands, there are efforts to improve conditions. But further down the supply chain, in unregulated or informal facilities, abuse runs rampant. Investigative reports have uncovered child labor, 12-hour workdays, and even physical injuries from handling shells without protection. One 2020 report from labor watchdogs in India described workers with permanent nerve damage in their hands, victims of long-term exposure to the acidic oils that linger in poorly ventilated processing rooms. In another, some women confessed they had to hide injuries or risk losing their jobs. And here's the twisted part. Consumers rarely know any of this. The packaging may say natural, organic, or hand-picked, but there's no legal requirement to disclose labor practices on most food products. Unless you're buying from certified fair trade or ethically sourced brands, chances are you have no idea how or by whom your cashews were prepared. Some companies are taking steps in the right direction, offering better wages, investing in safer processing facilities, or supporting farmer cooperatives. But these examples are still the exception, not the rule. Cashews may look clean, simple, and guilt-free in the bowl on your table, but their true cost is often measured in human suffering, not dollars. And here's the harsh truth. If you're eating cashews that came cheap, someone else probably paid the price. But even after all that, danger, labor, and exploitation, the story isn't over. Because now, the focus shifts to quality control, where every nut is scrutinized under strict standards. And this next part? It reveals even more about how the system favors profit over people. The meticulous process that makes cashews safe to eat. After everything, harvesting under the hot sun, steaming out toxins, cracking shells by hand, the cashew still isn't ready to eat. Because now, it faces the final test, the grading line. This part of the journey might not be as dangerous as the early stages, but it's no less demanding. Once the nuts are shelled and dried, they're still coated in a thin, papery skin known as the testa. This layer doesn't just fall off. It has to be carefully removed, often with the help of machines or by hand in smaller facilities. The nuts are then sent through a second drying phase. This isn't about safety, it's about precision. Drying the nuts again makes the husk brittle and easier to separate without damaging the delicate kernel inside. Next comes the most detail-oriented part of the entire process, sorting and grading. Workers, often seated for hours at long tables, manually inspect each cashew to determine its size, shape, and color. The goal? To separate the large, pale, unbroken nuts from the smaller, darker, or cracked ones. Why does this matter? Because whole, pristine cashews can sell for nearly double the price of broken pieces. The market places a premium on appearance, not just taste. So, a perfectly round cashew with a golden hue might end up in a luxury snack tin, while a broken half could be crushed into cashew butter or tossed into trail mix. Even with the rise of automation, human hands are still essential at this stage. Machines struggle to match the precision and judgment of trained workers, who can identify imperfections with a glance. It's a tedious job, but it's what ensures that only the most flawless nuts make it to upscale shelves around the world. And yet, this step is also a stark reminder of the inequality baked into the industry. The workers doing this meticulous grading often earn the least, even though their efforts define the final product's value. It's ironic. The closer a cashew gets to its polished, snack-ready form, the more its production is driven by aesthetic perfection, even as the people behind it remain invisible. Still, the journey isn't quite finished. There's one last transformation left: roasting. And that step is where flavor, preservation, and mass production all collide. Because even after all this careful handling, one mistake in the final phase can ruin the entire batch. Roasting, packaging, and a global journey. After all the growing, harvesting, and hazardous processing, the humble cashew finally reaches its final transformation: roasting. But don't let the simplicity of the word fool you. This stage is just as critical as everything that came before, because one misstep here, and the entire batch of nuts, months of labor, can be lost in seconds. Roasting does two main things: enhances flavor and ensures safety. Even though the toxic shell oil has already been removed, roasting helps burn off any lingering traces and destroys hidden bacteria that may have survived previous steps. It's the final layer of protection between you and a potentially dangerous snack. The roasting itself can be done in two ways: dry roasting or oil roasting. Dry roasting is considered the cleaner method. It's done in high-temperature ovens, where the nuts are baked slowly and evenly, bringing out their nutty aroma and buttery flavor without adding extra fats. This is the preferred method for premium or health-focused brands. Oil roasting, on the other hand, involves frying the cashews in vats of vegetable oil, often peanut or sunflower. This creates a crispier, saltier finish, and is typically used for mass-market snack products. It's faster, cheaper, and sometimes more addictive, but less healthy. Once roasted, the cashews are cooled, sorted once again, and then vacuum-packed or sealed in nitrogen-flushed bags to preserve freshness and flavor. The goal here is to prevent oxidation, which can make the nuts go rancid quickly. With proper packaging, cashews can stay fresh for up to a year, making them one of the most shelf-stable fresh snacks available. But here's where things get even more global. Most of the world's cashew processing doesn't happen in the country where the nuts are grown. For example, Ivory Coast and Nigeria grow massive amounts of raw cashews, but many are shipped to India or Vietnam for processing, where labor is cheaper and infrastructure is more developed. This means that a single cashew might start its life in West Africa, get shelled in Southeast Asia, and finally be roasted and packaged in Europe or the US. That's thousands of miles of travel, multiple borders crossed, and dozens of workers involved, just for a nut that weighs less than 5 grams. And yet, most consumers will never think twice. Cashews are sold in tidy little bags with bold lettering, all natural, lightly salted, roasted to perfection. There's no mention of the journey, the risk, or the human hands that made it possible. It's a marvel of modern food logistics, and a masterclass in branding over transparency. But as global demand continues to rise, so does the pressure on the system. Farmers are expected to grow more, workers are expected to move faster, and companies are expected to cut costs. So where does this leave the people on the ground? And is this booming industry truly sustainable? That's the question looming over the final chapter of this story. Because behind the sweet, salty crunch is a growing storm the industry can't ignore. The sustainability myth. Is the cashew industry built to last? Cashews are often marketed as part of a healthy, eco-conscious lifestyle, clean snacks for mindful eaters. But beneath the glossy image lies a growing truth. The cashew industry is facing a sustainability crisis, and not just environmentally. Let's start with the land. Cashew trees thrive in hot tropical climates with well-drained, sandy soil. But expanding plantations often means clearing forests or converting land once used for diverse crops. In countries like Ivory Coast and India, monoculture cashew farming has led to soil degradation, loss of biodiversity, and even conflicts over water use. As more land is pushed into production, native ecosystems and the communities that rely on them are being pushed out. Then there's the human side. The demand for cheap labor has created an industry that's heavily dependent on underpaid, overworked, and often invisible workers. Most are women, and many work in unregulated conditions with no health protections or formal contracts. The reliance on manual labor, especially for shelling and sorting, means the industry can't scale sustainably without either improving working conditions or turning to full automation, which would put millions of people out of work. But automation isn't the magic fix either. While some factories are investing in machines to handle shelling and grading, those machines are expensive and often inaccessible to smaller producers in Africa and Southeast Asia. Plus, they still struggle with precision, often damaging the nuts and reducing their value. As a result, global brands continue to rely on human hands for the final touch, despite knowing the risks involved. From an economic standpoint, the price volatility of cashews makes things even more unstable. Farmers may plant thousands of trees, only to face low prices during harvest season due to oversupply or shifting global demand. Without price protections or guaranteed buyers, many small-scale farmers struggle to break even, let alone invest in more sustainable practices. Then there's climate change. Cashew trees are hardy, but they're still sensitive to droughts, extreme heat, and irregular rainfall, conditions that are becoming more common. In places like Mozambique and Ghana, recent seasons have seen significant crop failures due to shifting weather patterns. If these trends continue, entire regions could become unsuitable for cashew cultivation. And yet, the global appetite keeps growing. Cashew consumption has more than doubled in the last 15 years, especially in health-focused Western markets. But very few consumers stop to ask, at what cost? Without systemic reform, from better wages and labor protections to sustainable land management and transparent supply chains, the cashew industry risks collapsing under its own weight. It's a cycle that can't continue forever. Something has to give. And as you're about to see in the final section, it might already be starting to unravel. The controversy you didn't see coming. For decades, cashews have been sold as the perfect snack. Creamy, heart-healthy, plant-based. But behind that perfect image is a controversy that's been largely ignored by the mainstream. It's known as the blood cashew problem, a term increasingly used to describe cashews sourced through exploitative or unethical labor, similar to how blood diamonds drew global scrutiny. While it hasn't reached the same level of awareness, the issues are eerily parallel. Invisible suffering, valuable exports, and powerful companies turning a blind eye. Investigations in India, Vietnam, and West Africa have uncovered shocking conditions in some processing centers, locked workspaces, verbal and physical abuse, and workers handling caustic shells without gloves for 12 hours a day. In some of the worst cases, women have been permanently disfigured, with severe scarring on their hands and arms. And the biggest controversy? Major global brands have been linked to these factories. While most companies claim their supply chains are ethically sourced, the reality is that cashews often pass through multiple middlemen before reaching retailers. This murky trail allows corporations to dodge responsibility while still benefiting from low-cost labor. But pressure is mounting. Activists, NGOs, and ethical food movements are starting to call out the cashew industry, demanding greater transparency and better protections for workers. Some Western countries have even started pushing for regulations that would ban imports linked to forced labor, a move that could shake the industry to its core. Consumers, too, are waking up. More people are asking where their food comes from and what it costs, not just in money, but in human lives. As this awareness grows, some buyers are shifting toward fair trade certified cashews, willing to pay a bit more for peace of mind. But those options are still rare and expensive. This raises a tough question. Can the cashew industry survive without exploitation? The truth is, change is possible. Some companies are investing in safer equipment, better wages, and traceable supply chains. In parts of Tanzania and Kerala, worker-owned cooperatives are reshaping the cashew economy, showing that ethical production isn't just a dream, it's already happening. But those stories remain the exception. The vast majority of the cashews you'll find in stores today, they've likely passed through the hands of someone who was underpaid, underprotected, and overexposed to danger. It's a bitter truth behind a sweet-tasting snack. So the next time you grab a handful of cashews, ask yourself, do you know where they came from? Because what you don't know might just be the most controversial part of all. Cashews are more than just a tasty snack. They're the result of a complex, often unseen journey filled with hard work, risk, and sacrifice. From tropical orchards under scorching sun to dangerous shelling rooms, every nut carries a story of people and nature intertwined in a delicate balance. Yet, behind the crunchy exterior lies a deeper reality, one of hazardous labor, economic struggles, and growing concerns over sustainability and ethics. As consumers, we hold power. Choosing where and how we buy cashews can support fair wages, safer working conditions, and environmentally responsible farming. Look for brands that prioritize transparency, ethical sourcing, and fair trade certifications. By making informed choices, we help push the industry toward a future where cashews are not only delicious, but also truly sustainable and just. If this journey into the world of cashews surprised you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more eye-opening stories about the foods we love. Drop a comment below. What's something you didn't know before? Your support helps us keep uncovering the hidden stories behind everyday products. Thanks for watching, and remember, every snack has a story worth knowing.